came together and formed one conclusive end to a negotiation and agreed to sign a contract. At the moment there is an offer and acceptance or a meeting of the minds, it is said that at that point the broker has earned their commission. It doesn't say the broker gets paid their commission. It says it's when a broker earns his commission. The broker who is listing the property is required to advertise and market the property until it is successfully negotiated in a sale. The evidence of the offer and acceptance, the signed contracts, is evidence that that has occurred. The sale wasn't completed yet. It wasn't consummated. That will happen at a closing. But it was the agreement to sell was achieved through the offer and acceptance. Therefore, at that moment, a meeting of the minds occurs and a broker is said to have earned the commission. But again, does not get paid until the closing. So competent parties, offer and acceptance. The third item for an element of a valid contract is called consideration. Consideration is something of value given by one and accepted by the other in exchange for something of value. In the sale of a house, cash, certified checks, a legal tender, a monetary equivalent, money, is paid as consideration to the seller who accepts it in exchange for selling the house to the buyer. So he's giving a house, getting cash. The buyer's giving cash and getting a house. So consideration is given and accepted in a bilateral agreement contract. Now, through time, guys, many things have been termed to be consideration. I have done real estate jobs as my own broker, not under the guise of another broker, where I have bartered. What? No. What do you mean bartered? Well, I had a house listing up in Greenwood Lake, New Jersey, up in there in West Milford. Beautiful area, nice lake, beautiful. Good fishing, caught some really nice muskies up there. And the guy, after I had visited him, said, just so you know, I barely have enough money to pay off the mortgage. I don't know how much money I'm going to have left to pay your commission. And you want X% commission. I don't know how I'm going to pay that. I'm like, well, I really don't work for free. I'm sorry. He says, well, I'm a paving contractor. What I could do is if you sell my house, I could pave a driveway or two for you in exchange for the selling of my house as a form of consideration. And I thought about it. I went back and I called my attorney. I said, how do I do this if I accept this deal? He told me it has to be a monetary equivalency I'm going to report it to the IRS, et cetera, et cetera. So I actually pay taxes on a service that I get instead of a cash income I get. Anyway, I did it. Sold this house. And yeah, I got 2 driveways paved because of that. Free of charge to me. Now, obviously, I reported the cost of the paving as income on the sales contract for my own IRS accounting purposes and had to pay taxes on that amount. But that's considered something of value. So the law says anything that has value could be consideration. In fact, the terms love and affection have been said to be of value, therefore are considered consideration in a contract. So that little love shack and hackensack I'm going to give to little Missy because she gives me love and affection. But here's the problem with love and affection or some other nebulous type of valuation. Can you just see this now? 2 attorneys in a back room, closed doors, discussing. Now, exactly what kind of love, under what conditions, and how often will this love be proffered to my client? How do we track the numerical number of hours of love to compensate my client accordingly? I don't even want to think about that conversation. That's how weird that can get. But the courts have determined that love and affection have value. So for my Missy, she gives me love and affection. That's consideration. I could give her the love shack if I wanted to in an equal swap. I'm not suggesting you do this. The broker you're going to work for is going to insist that they get paid in cash. They don't want to hear about barter or love and affection. They don't want to hear any of that. They want to know how much cash are we getting. Our commission is paid in dollars, not in services. As my own broker, I had the leniency, the ability to decide whether I want to do that or not. But you as a salesperson, no, you don't have that ability. You have to work under the guise that your clients are going to pay cash for the deals that they're doing, and therefore the cash, the monetary equivalent of a service or something, is what you're going to be receiving. So consideration is something of value accepted by one in exchange for something of consideration offered by another. Money for a house, even swap of consideration. Before I move on, does anyone have any questions about offered acceptance or consideration, since we already covered competent parties? Ramey, you got a question. I'll wait. Ramey, was there a question? No? Okay, guys, again, please don't leave your dialogue bars open. It looks like you're asking a question, and we do wait for questions, so please, let's not delay class. Arson has a question, so I'll wait. Once the offer is accepted, can a buyer back out? Absolutely. Happens quite often. Here's the thing, guys, and I'm just talking statistically speaking. For every 4 deals you sign, have offer and acceptance completed, you're going to have at least 1 fall apart during attorney review. Just so you know. The fall through rate right now in contracts is about 20 to 25%. 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5 contracts fall apart before they get out of attorney review. So accept it as a fact that that happens and move on. There's no getting upset over spilt milk. You get what you get and you don't get upset. You just get back to work and get another deal. That's all. Good question, though. All right, not seeing any more. Let's continue. The 4th thing that makes a contract valid is legality of object. What? In other words, the contract must have a legal purpose to it. Buying a house, buying a commercial building, renting an apartment done by contract is done for legal purposes, to do business, to live in, whatever it is. However, if there's an illegal objective to doing a contract, then that contract is not valid. In other words, the legality of the contract may not involve an illegal purpose, nor can it be against public policy, laws. When Tony Soprano wants to put a hit on Fat Paulie, that's a contract, right? No. That's just an expression they use because it's obviously an illegal objective. That could never be a contract. It must be for a legal objective. So, legality of object. Any questions on that? Not seeing any. Oh, there is. Okay, hold on. Can the seller back out once the house is? I think I just said that about 3 minutes ago. Yeah, and it happens often. Guys, you know, we do start at 1, not at 1:15, so please try to be on time. You'll hear all this stuff. All right, I'm going to moderate the conversation and move on here. Now, we talked about the 4 requirements for a valid contract. Competent parties, consideration, offer and acceptance, legality of object. Those are the 4 requirements to make a contract valid. Now, there are other things in a contract. But you have to have a minimum of these four to be considered valid. A valid contract could be oral or written. Oh, hold on a minute. You mean I can sell houses on an oral contract? I didn't say that. I said a valid contract may be oral or written. However, I've also been stating since day one that in real estate, all our contracts are required to be put in writing. Required, not suggested, required. Why? Because of what's known as parole evidence rule. And I mentioned this just the other day. Parole evidence rule stipulates that the written contract supersedes any oral agreement. The written contract supersedes any oral agreement. That doesn't mean oral agreements are invalid. They still could be. However, you're running a very high probability of risk with an oral contract. You cannot use oral contracts in real estate. As I said again, the Real Estate Commission requires that all our agreements be put in writing. This is known as the Statute of Frauds. But let's explore oral contracts for a minute. An oral contract is said to be valid between parties. So if, let's see who's online with us. Mujtaba Bajwa, and I hate if I just butchered your name, but he and I, or she and I don't know, it doesn't matter, enter into an oral agreement. And then a month later, I say, hey, where's my deposit money? You look at me and say, what are you talking about? So remember we had that agreement to buy something? Yeah, I remember that. Well, you were going to give me some money. Where is it? Oh, well, I decided I'm not going to give you that money right now. I'll give it to you later. Well, that's not fair to me, isn't it? I'm still going to buy your house. Okay, so I wait another month or two and it goes by and still no money from you. And we're not even close to closing. I say, where's my money? Okay, what money again was that? And all of a sudden, you can't remember that you promised to give me money. How am I going to enforce an oral agreement? By law, it's unenforceable. Unless there was clear and compelling evidence of that agreement, meaning witnesses, tape recordings, a video recording, audio-video recording of the conversation. That would be clear and compelling evidence of the agreement and the terms and conditions of the agreement and may become enforceable. However, we all don't carry around recorders and record everything we do. Or do we? Or does Big Brother do that for us? I'm just asking. But here's the thing. Let's say I tell you guys this. The Steelers are going to tank in the first round of the playoffs, period. And I bet you $1,000 they tank. You say, you're wrong. Great. The Steelers tank in the first round of playoffs and they're out. Well, then you owe me $1,000. But you say, I'm not paying you $1,000. I say, why not? I don't have any bet with you. Show me the contract. But it was an oral agreement, exactly, and I don't recall anything about what we talked about. How am I going to enforce that? I'm not. But if we had a written contract or a recording of that contract, I could say, here's your own words saying these things. In other words, it's still valid between you and me. But when it comes to enforceability, I may be out of luck unless I have clear and compelling evidence. Parole evidence rule states that the written contracts take precedent over any oral agreement. Therefore, the statute of frauds is very clear. You have to have a written contract. And the Real Estate Commission says all contracts in real estate must be in writing. Any questions about an oral or written contract? Luciana, no offense. Anybody else with a comment or a question? Don't you ever lay your hands on a Pittsburgh Steeler fan. For written contracts, should they be notarized? Why? What would be the purpose of notarizing a contract, Andrew? The only thing that a notarization does is attest to the validity of the signatures on the contract. That's all. There's no reason to have a notary sign or attest to a contract between parties. A real estate agent doing the negotiating and watching people sign contracts can sign as witness to a contract. It doesn't take a notary. All it takes is anybody observing what happened to write their name down as a witness to the signing. That's all. No other questions? Were there? I'm going to wait for a second. I see someone else typing, so I'll hang on. Wait, so if it's supposed to be written, but it says it may be a voluntary contract, yes. That means, what if they don't want to sign? Well, then there's no contract. Remember, a contract has to have an offer and acceptance to be valid. And that proof is the signed contract. If there's no signed contract, there's no offer and acceptance. It is that simple, believe me. Okay, good. We're ready to go. Let's move on then. The statute of frauds, right next to the Statute of Liberty in the New York Harbor. No, it's not. Kidding. It's next to Grant statute. Statute of frauds means that contracts for sale of real estate must be in writing. Any contractual agreement that a real estate agent is involved in must be in writing. There's many different types of contracts in real estate, guys. So the more you know about contracts, the more money you're going to make. A listing agreement is a contract. A buyer's agency agreement is a contract. A rental agreement is a contract. An independent contractor's agreement is a contract. There are many, many different types of contracts in the real estate business. And according to the Real Estate Commission and Statute of Frauds, they all must be in writing. Now, there is an exception here, guys, and that is for leases of less than 3 years. However, and this is a very big however, if you're a realtor participating in a lease and it's less than 3 years, then your requirement is that it be in writing. It must be in writing for any and every contract you enter into. This exemption is for other than real estate professionals. For a real estate professional, must be in writing. The other exemptions where clear and convincing evidence existed. The buyer and seller had an oral agreement, a video, audio recording, showing and listening and hearing the words that were spoken could be clear and compelling evidence in court of law. But for contract purposes for real estate, it must be in writing. Why? Because of the risk factor. Guys, you never want to have a situation where you get into where people said, well, you said this and you said that, and the other person says, no, 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 no. What I said was this and what I said that, meaning this. And the guy goes, no, 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 I clearly heard you say this, meaning that. And the guy goes, I never meant that. And all of a sudden you got a he said, she said scenario, and everything goes downhill from there. So avoid any and all risky scenarios by getting all your agreements in writing. All right, moving on. A real estate broker's authorization is received in writing through a listing agreement or an agency agreement or a lease or whatever the case may be. To work for a buyer, I would have a buyer sign a buyer's agency agreement authorizing me to be their agent. And by having a written contract, we both understand there's terms and conditions of how we work. And it becomes enforceable under law because it's in writing. If it's I'm dealing in sales and leasing of properties, I want to get all those contracts in writing to confirm all the terms and conditions under which the sale or lease may occur. So no matter who the broker works for on behalf of the buyer, seller, or landlord and tenant, all contracts, again, in writing. Now, I may have hammered this point much more than anybody will care to, but obviously the book feels it's very important that I do, or else they don't have these PowerPoints and it shouldn't be in the book to this extent. That's how important it is to understand why you must have contracts in writing. All right. Now, before I move on, any questions about contracts in general? Okay, not seeing any questions. I'll move on. Types of contracts. There's different types of contracts. And let's take them one by one. There are express contracts. By legalese definition, express means oral or written. However, you know that the statute of fraud says all realtors must have written contracts. So when we say express contracts in real estate, we mean written contracts. Written contracts are easy to look at, read, and understand, and show specific intentions, responsibilities, contingencies, conditions, timeframes in the contract. It expresses them right in a written format. So an express contract for real estate is one that's in writing. If you're betting your neighbor $1,000 on the Steelers game, you can do that in an oral agreement that's between you and your neighbor. But when it comes to real estate, express means in writing. So that's one that's easily, clearly seen, understood, and agreed to by all parties. An implied contract is different. An implied contract is determined by its acts or conduct. When I leave here after school is over today, I'm going to stop at Quick Check, fill up with gas, maybe buy a Powerball and a Megabucks in case I hit the $500 billion payout, ka-ching, and then drive home, spend a nice quiet evening drinking my brains out. No, I won't do that. I'll have fun. But I am going to a sampling tonight with some friends. But anyway, anything wrong with that scenario? Of course not. Except when I filled up with gas, what contract did I sign that I have to pay for gas? What contract did I sign that I have to pay for lottery tickets? There was no contract, so I don't have to pay, right? No. By our social constructs, guys, there's a platform of social mores that we all agree to abide by. And one is that if you receive a good or service that you request, then you have to pay for it. Long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, I used to work as a waiter in college. That was a long time ago. And I bussed tables and took orders and delivered food and collected bills and got tips. And my heart, first of all, goes out to any and all you guys who are in the food service industry. Because of this COVID crap, you don't have a job. That sucks. It sucks. But anyway, I was a waiter for 2 summers in college. I made some coin, I didn't get rich on it, but I made some coin. But the thing was, the policy where I worked was this. If the diner does a dine and dash, meaning they come in, order a nice big expensive meal, and then they split and not pay the bill, then the waiter was required to pay the tab for that bill. Ooh, that would hurt. I worked in a seafood restaurant in Manchester by the Sea, Massachusetts, where I lived. And once in a while, actually happened to me twice, someone tried to pull a dine and dash on me. Well, when I was a younger man, I used to be much more svelte. In fact, I used to run track in high school, and I was pretty quick son of a gun, fullback in college and all that stuff. But anyway, I could run and outrun the wind. So when two of these guys tried on me, I caught them in the parking lot by chasing after them. And I dragged them back to the owner by their collars, literally, and stood them in front of the owner. And the owner said this: "You have two choices. One, I can put you in jail for theft of goods and services. Or you can pay me my bill and give your waiter a mandatory 50% gratuity because he had to run you down." And they paid up both times. There was one time, however, the guy says to the owner, he goes, "I never signed a contract with you for nothing, so you can't prove a thing." He goes, "Okay." And he starts calling the police. He goes, "What are you doing?" He goes, "I'm calling the cops, coming to arrest you for theft of goods and services." He goes, "All right, I'll pay up." Guys, some people think they know more than you do, and let me tell you, they probably know less than you do. The fact is, we live in a culture and society that where if I ask you for a good or service to provide to me, then you would expect me to pay for that. By stealing your meal, you perform theft of goods and services. So we have implied contracts that we all agree to abide by every day. So you have express contracts clearly written out and understood, or implied by the social compacts we make, agree to do what's right. Any question about express or implied contracts? That's right. That's right, Luciana. No, I'd still go to work, even though I won $500 million. I'd still go to work every day. I have familiarity with the food industry, and as I work in the banquet server for a banquet, oh, it's a lot of fun. Okay. I was hoping you weren't going to tell me we haven't worked in like a year and a half. I'm just glad to hear that you're working at least. Oh, just all my work as a food service manager. Now I'm here. Guys, there's horror stories like this all over the United States, and I'm sorry to hear this. I really am. But this is the world we live in today. Was there any other comments or suggestions or issues regarding these express or implied contracts? Are there any contracts between a salesperson and a buyer looking for us? Yeah, that would be a buyer's agency agreement. But it wouldn't be between the salesperson and the buyer, it would be the broker and the buyer. Is there a situation of implied contracts in real estate? None that I'm aware of, Stefan. Remember, in real estate, all our contracts must be in writing. All of them. All right. I'm not seeing any more questions. I will move on. Are option and unilateral contracts more or less the same, or are there differences? We're going to talk about that in just a minute. But good question, and as again, you're jumping ahead of me, but I'll catch up very quickly. So hang on a sec. I'm going to moderate. So we covered express and implied. Now unilateral versus bilateral. Two different things. So let's take it real simple. And yeah, I am going to be super simple. What's that? Versus what's that? One is a unicycle, meaning one, and one is a bicycle, meaning two wheels. One wheel, two wheels. This is the extent of my quality drawing technical expertise, guys. You can laugh all day long. I know what it means, and that's all that counts. But a unicycle has one wheel. A bicycle has two wheels. Therefore, a unilateral contract is one where only one party must perform to fulfill the contract requirements. A bilateral contract is where two parties have to fulfill obligations to perform in a contract. So if I'm buying a house from you, Stefan, it's a bilateral agreement because I have to apply and get a mortgage, and I have to do home inspections, title searches, surveys, inspections, the whole 9 yards. I got to do everything. You, however, have to keep the property in good condition, not let it go to waste, keep your insurance active on the property, develop a deed for conveyance at the closing, and move out all your stuff and maintain the property until closing. So we both have terms and obligations we must achieve and demonstrate to fulfill the contract obligations. So the sale of a real estate parcel is an example of a bilateral agreement. A unilateral agreement can be described in the following manner. So an option, Charles, your question, are options and unilateral contracts more or less the same? An option would be a demonstration of a unilateral contract. So let me try to explain what that means. My sales staff has been a little lackadaisical lately, so I want to spur a little activity to see if I can generate some more sales. So at the beginning of the month, I hold a sales rally and I tell all my salespeople this. By the end of January, whoever brings in 4 or more listings gets a $1,000 cash bonus at the end of the month. What did I just do? Did I have an agreement with my salespeople to do something? No. I made a unilateral contract offer, and that would be this. If you get 4 listings or more at the end of the month, then you get $1,000. I don't have to do anything to achieve that. Only the salespeople can fulfill the obligation of the unilateral offer. If they choose not to, then they won't get the $1,000. But if they choose to do it and perform, then they get the $1,000. It's that simple. So an offer, a one-way offer, is a unilateral contract. Only one party has to perform to fulfill the contract. If they don't, then there is no contract. If they do, then they fulfill the obligation of the contract. So a unilateral contract is where only one party has to perform. An option or offering of a condition could be an example of a unilateral contract. I hope I cleared that up. If not, I'll have to do it again. But does anybody have any additional questions on what I'm talking about? I'll wait. Speaking of the Steelers, this is, I guess, Stephen Harris. You must be related to Franco Harris, right? Just kidding. Just kidding. When you draw the unicycle and bike, I was ready to play Pictionary. Example of option contract, please. Boy, not too demanding. Hang on a sec. Once an offer is accepted and the property goes under contract, can the seller back it? I think I said this like 2 or 3 times already. Yes. I will be smarter to offer the unilateral 1,000 for sales, not listing. It's Steven. Okay, no worries. I'm a Titans fan. Okay, that's cool enough. Oh, so originally Houston Oilers, huh? All right, anybody else before I move on? Oh, you don't want to know. And besides, I haven't watched or participated in the NFL practices for 4 years. I gave up on the NFL. All right, let's move on. I'm sorry I even said anything about football. Let's go on. So someone wanted to know about an option. Can I give an example of an option? Okay, let's go there. Where was it? Example of an option contract, please. All right. I'd like to sell my house, but the market isn't right now. I know within about 2 years, though, it should be right for me to sell and get my price. But I need to make money in the meantime. So I'm going to lease my property out to a tenant. And in the lease, I'm going to put an option agreement, which says, if tenant agrees at the end of the 24-month lease, they will buy the property for $400,000. That's an option to the lease contract. Meaning, once they complete the obligation of the lease, and if they want to buy my property, they already have an option to buy it at $400,000. Once I make an option, I'm an optionor, right? I'm giving an option. You, the tenant, would be the optionee receiving it. The optionee is the only one that can fulfill the obligation of the contract by buying my house for $400,000 in 2 years' time. If they search the real estate markets and the house is only worth $300,000, then they wouldn't exercise their option and the contract would go unfulfilled. That would be an example of an option contract as a unilateral offering. I hope that cleared it up, but I do need to move on. So let's go. There are executed and executory contracts. Now, if you think about the word executed, you just automatically think it's been put to death, right? Well, technically that's correct, meaning both parties have performed and fulfilled the obligations under the contract, and it goes to a closing. That's an executed contract. An executory contract is one that still has things to be performed on before it can close. So I sign a contract with you, Luciana, to sell my house. While we're in attorney review, we technically really don't have a contract until the attorney review ends. But once we do end the attorney review, we have an executory contract. I have to get a mortgage, do inspections, title searches, surveys, the whole 9 yards. You have to reserve your property, get it in shape for the closing, maintain insurance, get a deed drawn up to convey ownership interest. So we both have things to do. It's executory. But we go to a closing, everything's done, we change, I give you money, you give me the deed. It's now an executed contract. It's been put to death, and all parties have performed all responsibilities under the contract. Did anybody not understand executory versus executed contracts? Okay, I'm gonna hang. Nope, I guess not. Okay, so let's move on then again. Valid, enforceable, voidable, and void contracts. Well, we already talked to you about what a valid contract is, didn't we? It must have a minimum of 4 requirements: competent parties, offer and acceptance, consideration, and legal objective. If it has those 4 elements in a contract, it's a valid contract. By definition, then, a void contract is one that does not meet all the 4 criteria. So if even one of those 4 criteria is missing, the contract is void. It's no good. On the surface alone, it's no good. We don't have competent parties, therefore there's no contract. We don't have an offer in consideration, we don't have a contract. We don't have consideration, no contract, and it's not for legal purpose. It's a no good void contract. On the surface alone, you can see that because at least one of the 4 valid requirements are missing. So any contract that is missing at least one of the 4 requirements to make it a valid contract is then a void contract. It's no good. It's not even worth the paper it's written on. Just no good. Which leaves us enforceable and voidable. Let's take voidable first. Now, quite a few years ago, credit card companies would show up at senior day on campus of high schools so that when those seniors graduate, they can apply and get a credit card for the summer to prepare for college to buy all the goods and services going to need to be in college. So they signed up a gajillion seniors, because they're going to be 18 pretty much in the very near future, to get credit cards. And they did. And the seniors went out and they charged up a storm. Bought all kinds of clothes and had great fun during the summer, going to places, doing things with their friends and families. And then they went to college. And then at college, they got summons to appear in court because non-payment of bills. And they're like, what are they talking about? Oh, I didn't pay my credit card bill. So yeah. So they go to court. If they were smart and got an attorney, this is what happened. When the attorney showed up in court, the credit card company started to shake because the attorney argued this: Your Honor, my client is a minor and cannot be held responsible for their actions. Yes, they did enter a contract with the credit card company, and the terms and conditions of that contract was to repay what they borrowed plus interest. However, because my client is a minor, my client has the right to change the conditions of the contract, and by not paying, they changed the conditions of the contract, and the credit card companies could not counter that and must accept non-payment. The credit card companies argued, but they signed a contract and are responsible to pay. And the judge would remind the credit card company, by entering into a contract with a minor, you run special risk, and that is the minor can change the conditions of the contract, but you cannot. And whatever changes they make, you must abide by. So therefore, case dismissed, no debt due. Today, credit card companies do not show up on high school campuses anymore. They go to orientation week at college when the freshmen enter school. So when they're 18 and start college, they're going to be adults. So now they don't have any voidability issues with contracts. So because you're a minor, you have the right to do pretty much anything you want. And the adult party on the other side must agree to your conditions of change. Boy, that sucks. Well, that's the law. So a minor could void a contract or make it voidable at his discretion, but an adult cannot. Another example of voidable contract: something about the condition of the contract or the property in question changes after the contract was initiated. Let me give an example. That same light rail is going through that house, and that house is subject to eminent domain. Well, if there's a sales contract or negotiated against that property, that contract is now voidable by the buyer because they're not going to be able to buy the property. It's going to eminent domain and destroyed. Therefore, since a change in the condition of the property status occurred during the contract phase, the contract became voidable by the buyer, who would naturally then back out of the contract and get their money back. Any question about valid, void, or voidable before I get into enforceable? Okay, no questions. Let's move on. And okay, I'll give. What's your question? No question. Is there, guys, don't make me do this. You got a question or not? If someone is in breach of contract, is it automatically void or could it be rectified? It can be rectified. Yes, it can be rectified. We'll get to breach of contract very soon. But please, again, you're jumping ahead. Don't do that. Hang on. Can a landlord back out of an option contract without even knowing what the contract states? It would be irresponsible for me to answer that question. So if you have a specific contract you want to present to me to discuss, you better email it to me so I can review it to understand what you're talking about. If you're just talking in general, I can't answer that question. All right. Anybody else with a question regarding the topics being discussed? See a couple people typing, so I am going to hang on. Can an oral contract be voidable? It is by its nature voidable. And by nature, it's also unenforceable unless there's clear and compelling evidence of the agreement. I think we did state that a couple times. So I'm not seeing, so Adele, is there a question or are you just going to bop on and off and delay our course? I'm just asking. Like the option to buy later given to a tenant. Can a landlord say, I am no longer, no, Adele, maybe you weren't listening, but I said, once an option is offered, the optioner is bound to fulfill that requirement. You cannot change the option after presented. It can only be exercised or not exercised by the optionee. So once the option is offered, it cannot be withdrawn. No. Okay, anybody else before I move on? Hey, Adele, you still got a question? Okay, let me open it up to you. What's your question? You're welcome. Okay, anybody else? No? Let's move on. Enforceable. When is a contract enforceable and when does it become non-enforceable? Good question. Thanks for asking. So a contract is a binding agreement that becomes a contract after attorney review has expired or ended. Meaning, when a contract is signed by buyer and seller in New Jersey, there's a legal requirement that buyer and seller have the option to review the contract for a minimum of 3 business days with their attorney if they wish to, in which time they can approve the contract or negate the contract or argue with the other party to change a condition or two in the contract. So during a period of attorney review, either party can approve or disapprove of the contract, back out, get their money back, and move on with no penalties. And during the attorney review contract period, a contract is unenforceable. You cannot approve or enforce a contract if it's still in attorney review because it has not yet been gelled or set in stone. Things could still happen and change. Therefore, after attorney review ends, then the contract is enforceable. It becomes unenforceable during attorney review and if conditions change later that affect the ability of parties to perform. Let me suggest that in some times when people buy houses, they're relying on getting a mortgage approval that they have yet to get. So one of the contingencies in a contract or conditions of the contract is that the buyer get a mortgage approval. So the buyer's going to ask for, let's say, 30 days to get their mortgage approval from the mortgage company to buy the house. That's a condition of sale. If the buyer does not get the approval by the time necessary, then that buyer could ask that the contract become unenforceable and that it be canceled so they can get their money back. If the seller agrees, then that's what happens, and usually that occurs sometimes. In other words, because they couldn't get a mortgage, they were not able to perform on the contract, and because the contract gave them a escape clause, they could exercise that and get out of the contract, and it becomes non-enforceable afterwards. No contract then exists. That's an example of unenforceable contract. Or another example would be a condition of the contract is physically impossible to perform. So when buying my house, I insist in the contract as part of our negotiation that the buyer deliver to me at closing a certified check for the amount of plus 2 Mars rocks. I want Mars rocks. I'd love to have a Mars rock. So you have to get me 2 Mars rocks when you close on my property. Well, first of all, how are you going to get Mars rocks? You're going to have to fly to Mars and come back. That's going to take maybe a couple of years, but we got to close in 60 days. So it's going to be physically impossible for you to perform on one of the contingencies. Therefore, because of impossibility of performance, the contract becomes unenforceable and is dismissed. Did anybody have any questions on enforceable or unenforceable contracts? Not seeing any. Oh, there is, so I'm going to hang on. Trinidad's got a question. Excuse me. Of course, it's a crazy contingency. That's why I spoke about it, because it's crazy. Andrew, did you have a question or a comment? I'm guessing no. So there it is. So even, excuse me, so even if one contingency can't be met, the whole contract can be invalidated. Yes. Trinidad, is there a question? I see you coming and going all the time, and I don't know if I should wait for your question or just keep going. What happens to the attorney counsel on crazy contingency? I don't know what you're talking about. It has nothing to do with the topics being discussed, so I'm not even going to respond to your question. I'm sorry. Okay, guys, I do want to move on. Is there any other important or pertinent question to this topic we can discuss? Can you give another example of an unenforceable contract? Sure. So I'm going to sell my house. I put on the MLS, and a buyer comes and offers me a price, and we agree to terms and conditions, sign a contract. Everything's going swimmingly, and we're a month away from closing. And all of a sudden, the highway department drops a subpoena on me to appear in court for a condemnation hearing that my house is being taken under eminent domain. Now that the state is taking my house, the contract becomes unenforceable upon the buyer, because how is he expected to buy something he's not going to get? So a condition under which the contract was created now has changed, making it unenforceable. Therefore, the contract becomes void, and everybody gets their money back and continues on their merry way. So hopefully that would satisfy your additional example of an enforceable contract. All right, guys, let's move on. Voidable is unenforceable. Voidability could also be due to undue influences or duress. But Tim, no one stands over somebody and twists their arms and makes them sign a paper today for contract that you know of. Well, let me do something even simpler. Hey, Mr. Client, got the contracts all prepared. Let's meet for dinner. We'll sign contracts at dinner. Sound good? Yes. So we meet at dinner, have a few pops, and then after dinner, while we're having our coffees and Zambucas, we sign contracts. No problem here, right? Or is there? 3 days later, the buyer's attorney calls me up and say, I'm invalidating this contract. And I say, how come? Because you used undue influence to convince my buyer to sign a contract. I'm like, what are you talking about? I bought them dinner. But you also fed them alcohol. And everybody knows that even just one alcoholic beverage can change a person's perception. And you did that to make them more compliant to your wishes to have them sign a contract. Is the attorney right? I'm going to have to say, quite probably yes. But I didn't really do that on purpose to make them sign a contract. I was just trying to be nice. Here's the thing, guys. If you're going to be signing contracts, do it before you go out and celebrate with a few pops. Because as I said, even one alcoholic beverage, I don't care if you're a big burly man of 6'10", 300 pounds. Even one alcoholic beverage can change your perception about something, even no matter how small. That could be termed undue influence. So avoid all these issues by having contracts signed before you celebrate. Just a word to the wise here, guys, because undue influence and duress can come from many different angles. Duress could be a psychological game you're playing with your client. Guys, don't even think that you can do this. No. Understand, everybody has the right to decide their own ability to contract. You should not be playing mind games with people to have them sign contracts, because that could be termed duress if proven. It could be hard to prove, but it could be proven. So a contract could become void or voidable by you using undue duress or undue influence on your client to sign a contract. A valid contract, on the other hand, is voluntary and freely signed by both parties at their own free will. So avoid any and all validity issues in your contracts. Now, there are additional contract issues, and there are primarily many different types of contract issues. First of all, performance of a contract. What does that mean? Well, remember when I said when you sign a contract, that's when you find out in the contract what you have to do to perform on the contract. There may be contingencies like buyer must get mortgage within 30 days after attorney review expires, or the contract becomes voidable. Or buyer has right to a home inspection, and if results determine that additional issues are a result, the buyer has the right to void a contract if the seller does not agree to comply or perform when solving those contract issues. Another out. So performance is a big deal. You can't get your mortgage, you're out of the contract. The house doesn't pass inspection, the seller won't take care of issues, you're out of the contract. But if they do, then you have to go to the next thing and perform on that. So performance is very important, and the only way to know if you're performing the contract is if we check off those items as they occur, which is, in other words, it's like a mile marker. You hit that mile marker, check it off. We performed it, next one. Hit it, performed, check it off, next one. If you don't perform as the contract requires, then the opposite party could ask you to perform using a term, time is of the essence. And if they use that term, that means put up or shut up. It's time to do something. Either you perform or you're out of the contract, because time is of the essence. So if you haven't gotten your mortgage in the 30-day allotment which we gave you, We will allow you an additional 10 days, 10 calendar days to get your mortgage approval because time is of the essence. Now, if you still don't get it after the 10 days, you're out of contract. You're done. You can't perform because you can't get that first performance criteria taken care of. So performance on a contract is everything. You got to perform when it comes time to perform. Any questions about this before I start moving on? Can a seller make an agent release earnest money deposit before inspections are finished? No, only attorneys or by completion of the contingency or performance criteria, then they could. No, they can't insist that that happen. It was saying in the book that you should have an attorney use the term time is of the essence remark. Is it true if we get to the point we should just go to an attorney? It may be too late, Rachel. Remember, in New Jersey, you need to decide whether you're going to use an attorney before you start performing on a contract. Because hiring an attorney late in the contract phase is kind of useless. In New Jersey, buyer and seller have the right to review a contract 3 days before the contract becomes binding on each party. And during that attorney review period, if one party disagrees with the conditions or performance criteria in the contract, they can negate the contract, get their money back, and move on. But after attorney review period is over, then they must perform as per the contract dictates, and whatever attorney you hire is not going to be able to change that unless the other party agrees. And not many people will be able to agree with that. So it's too late to hire an attorney after attorney review period ends. The time to hire an attorney is before and right after you sign a contract. It's not required that you have an attorney. But in New Jersey, may I recommend it's probably a wise idea to get a competent real estate counsel to advise you on the contract, my opinion. When earnest money is released, it goes to the buyer, right? Or are there, no. Sorry, wait a minute. When earnest money is released, it goes to the buyer, or there are cases where to go to the seller. Well, first of all, it doesn't go to the buyer. The deposit monies would go to the seller. However, they wouldn't go to the seller because if the buyer's at least smart or has an attorney, they will hold that money in escrow or with the realtor's escrow account and not convey it to the seller, because once it gets in the seller's hands, it's going to be very difficult to get back. Therefore, it's always a good idea to hire an attorney to hold any escrow monies for the buyer until the proper time is required to release it to the seller. That's my opinion, Charles. There's no requirement that you hire an attorney in New Jersey. In my personal opinion, though, you're going to be spending probably the largest amount of money on any investment you ever make by buying a piece of real estate. I think it's a good idea that you protect your investment by hiring a competent real estate counsel to advise you on this. That's my personal opinion. So I didn't see any other questions, so let's move on. And I hope I answered your question. Assignment and novation of contracts. Assignment of contract. What does that mean? So let me use a whiteboard. I'm the buyer. Here's the seller. I agree to buy the seller's property using a sales contract, and we sign the contract. I'm the buyer of record. During our contract phase, I say to the seller, I'm going to transfer my rights of the contract to my son. He's known as the assignee. I'm the assignor. I'm assigning the contract to my son, who's the assignee. First of all, in New Jersey, all our sales contracts state the following. This contract is not assignable. But then it says, however, if all parties agree in writing, meaning buyer, son, and seller, if all parties agree in writing to do so, then the buyer can assign the contract to the son, who is the assignee. So now the son is responsible to perform on the contract with the seller. But the question remains, what happens if the son doesn't perform as required? Then under the rules of assignment, the buyer still must perform. Because under the rules of assignment, if the assignee does not perform, then the buyer must. He's still on the hook for the deal. It's like having a co-borrower on a loan. If you don't pay, that co-borrower has to. An assignor assigns a contract to an assignee, in this case the son. If the son doesn't perform, then the assignor, me, has to. That's the requirement under an assignment. Did anybody have any question about what an assignment accomplishes? When assigned, would the son be responsible for the mortgage rent? Yeah, they have to perform. But if they don't, then the assignor must. Is this usually when a buyer lives out of state and say the son lives in New Jersey? Well, I don't know that there's a usual, and I'm going to tell you this, most contracts are never allowed to be assignable. And even if they were, the signer still has to perform if the assignee doesn't. So it doesn't matter where you live or what the conditions are. If the son doesn't perform, the father has to. In that case, that was what I was using as an example. What if the assignor does not qualify for the mortgage? Then how would the seller agree to let the assignment go to the son? They wouldn't. What if the signer, here we go with the what if questions again. What if the signer is sick and the son is not interested? I don't know. What happens if you bring a sack lunch on Tuesday and the moon is full? I don't see how I can answer that hypothetical question. Is there really any difference between an assignee and a co-signer? That's a question better left to an attorney to answer. I'm not a wordsmith that I couldn't give you definitions there, guy. Sorry, or Miss Rachel, I can't give you that. I don't know. You got anybody else with a question that I can answer? Oops, I may have missed a question. Let me look back. Isn't that covered under a power of attorney? When did I introduce power of attorney? Under what condition are you talking about? Isn't that covered? What is that, Joseph? The assignee is found not eligible during the contract period and he assigns to son. Thank you for your statement. Anybody else have a question? I have a question. How are you so funny? I'm not trying to be. Guys, this is a long class and there's a lot of heavy discussion. It would be silly not for me to try to interject a little humor here and there. Come on. Difference between performance contract and voidable, I don't know. What can you give me a definition of a performance contract? So I know what you're talking about. An assignee would be the same as power of attorney. No, 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 it has nothing to do with power of attorney and isn't even like a power of attorney. I didn't even explain novation. How could I explain it again? Guys, please. I'm going to have to moderate here. I never once mentioned the term novation. So how am I going to explain it again? Boy, oh boy, please, guys, come on. Let's be cognizant of what we're talking about. I will get to your topic about novation, but right now I'm just talking about assignment. I want to make sure we're clear on that before we move on. So guys, please, I know you have a desire to learn and you want to know everything, but we will learn it in its timely manner. It makes a much better comprehensive presentation, and it makes you recall things very easy when we do it in an orderly fashion. So please, let's not try to jump ahead. It just mixes everything up and people get confused. I'll get there, I promise. So an assignment, once again, is where a person, an assignor, with the permission, written permission of the seller and the written agreement of the assignee and the assignor, can have the contract assigned to another party called the assignee if all parties agree in writing. And at the closing, the assignee must perform, but if he doesn't, then the assignor must. Therefore, an assignment is like a co-borrower, where if their primary respondent doesn't pay, then the co-borrower must. Remember, this is under an assignment. If all parties agree in writing, and I'm going to tell you right now, this is very, very rare, if it ever happens, that a complete contract right is assigned to another party and the assignor is relieved of all responsibility. But there could be. How that's done is where Kiernan wants to know about, through novation. What's novation? Novation would be a situation where, let's say, I want to sign the contract to my son. The seller would have to agree in writing to allow me to do that. And if my son can prove through a mortgage application that they can finance the property independently of me, then I would ask the seller to remove me, the assignor, from the responsibility of the contract. That can be accomplished by a document known as a novation. A statement signed by all parties involved that the original contract party, me, is now removed from the contract, and the assignee now slides into the place of the contract person. Therefore, I'm now removed, so now only that assignee must perform. I'm removed from the equation through novation. So I'm sorry it took a few extra minutes to get that out, but hopefully I answered your question for explaining novation one more time. And I just did for the first time. Now, any questions about assignments and novation? If you ask me about discharge or default, the statute of limitations, I'm going to shoot you. Just figuratively speaking, okay, it's not a direct threat, so please don't call the cops and report me to the Bureau of the Boards or anything. I'm just, I'm not born for this political correctness crap. So through novation, a signer would no longer have any responsibility. Correct, Stephen, correct. All right, I'm not seeing any more questions, so let's move on. Oh, I'm sorry, there is another question, so go ahead. What's your question there, Sahib? And Luciana, you got a question. Okay. Think of a teacher giving you an assignment. He confides in you to do the assignment and you're responsible to do it. No question. Okay, that's pretty cool. I like that, Luciana. In the case of novation, the old contract has no longer any force. No. I never said that, Sahib. I said the original contract party is removed from the contract and a new party takes their place. The contract's still in force and effect with the new party being named and I'm being removed from the contract. That contract is still in force and effect. So it's not like it loses any of its strength. It's just that it's a new contract between a new party and I'm removed. That's all. All right, not seeing any more questions. I am going to move on. It's in the book, on page 170. In the case of novation, the old contract no longer has any force. Exactly, because there's no party to that contract anymore. It's a new party. Therefore, it's a new contract with a new party. Still the same contract, but I'm removed from the contract. That's all. So the effect of the enforcement no longer holds on me, the assignor. But it does have full force and effect on the assignee. I'm the assignor, has effect on the assignee and the seller. So literally, it's a new contract because of a new party taking its place. All right, discharge of contract. There are many times contracts are discharged for many different reasons. Number one, primarily, is lack of performance. Mr. Buyer, you had ample time to perform the contract. You failed to do so. We sent you a time is of the essence letter, yet you still failed to perform. Therefore, there is no other choice except for the seller to declare the contract null and void due to non-performance, and the contract is hereby discharged. Whether that's through partial or substantial performance doesn't matter. You have not completed all of your requirements to perform. Therefore, because you only partially, even though substantially didn't 100% perform, contracts null and void and discharged. Or through impossibility of performance. Remember those Mars rocks? It's impossible for a buyer to get 2 Mars rocks in time for closing in 2 months. It's just physically impossible. Therefore, they cannot perform on the contract as directed. Therefore, the contract can be discharged in the buyer's favor because of impossibility of performance. Contracts can be discharged through mutual agreement. Listen, we both agree the contract's not working out to our benefit, so let's both agree to cancel it and move on, and you can do that. Or if you can't agree to cancel and you both went out, then you can go to court and have a court nullify the contract by operation of law. So in some cases, that's the end result of non-performance. All right, any questions about non-performance? Or assignment and novation once again? I think we're all caught up. Okay, good. No other questions. Oh, there is. Does the contract have to state the details of everything in order to discharge due to non-performance? Yes. That's why you want to make sure that by hiring an attorney, he can review the contract and make sure that it's adequate for you to perform on. If he determines that there's things missing in a contract, he can cause a delay in the acceptance of a contract by introducing articles and paragraphs for the other party to accept, to make it a complete contract. But if they don't, he can nullify the contract during attorney review. Guys, I'm going to tell you again. People spend the most amount of money on an asset when buying real estate. Now you can buy stocks and bonds, even a couple $100,000 for stocks and bonds, but today people are buying multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of real estate in one purchase. Probably the largest investment people ever make. Wouldn't you think paying an attorney $1,000 would be a good investment to protect your interest? Because think about it. Spend $1,000 to protect your multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars investment. If you didn't hire that attorney and something went wrong, you could be out several $100,000 and scratch your head and figure out, well, how come? Because you're not an attorney, you don't know what to look out for. It's not required that you have an attorney, but it's a very good scenario as a realtor to always recommend competent legal counsel when necessary. And believe me, in my opinion, it's always necessary. Okay. Default and breach of contract is where we're at now. So here we are. Contract has been fully performed on. We haven't closed yet. It's 2 days before closing. Buyers getting ready to move in. They're ready to close on their mortgage. That means they're ready to buy the house. The seller, everything's complete. But the seller 2 days before the closing says, I changed my mind. I'm not selling. What? Yeah, I've decided that this is the nicest house in the world and I'm not going to move, so I'm going to stay here. But we have a contract to purchase your house and we're going to be closing on it in 2 days. And the seller says, nope, decide to stay. What's the buyer going to do? Well, the first thing the buyer could do is just rescind or cancel the contract, hope they get their deposit monies back and move on. Yeah, in a perfect world, if that were to happen, then great, but that usually doesn't happen. The buyer's going to be pissed. They may have even sold their house and maybe living in a hotel with their luggage and with all their furniture in storage, paying an exorbitant storage bill, waiting to close, and now you're saying you're not going to close? I don't have a house. All my furniture is in storage, costs me thousands of dollars a week. And you're just going to walk away? Therefore, the buyer has a right to sue for compensatory damages if the seller doesn't want to sell. Meaning, Mr. Seller, because of the scenario you just put me in, I want, number one, all my deposit monies back without question. Plus, I want the cost of my attorney, title search, survey, home inspection, mortgage application, and any other cost I incurred covered by you, including my housing costs and storage costs of my furniture, as compensatory damages. Compensate me for my losses because you decided to back out at the last minute. So either they can rescind or cancel the contract, or if that doesn't work, they can sue for compensatory damages if the seller backs out. If the seller says, I'm not paying you a penny, go away, then the buyer has only one last result, and that is to sue for what's called specific performance. You never want to see this occur because this is where it can get really ugly really fast. A suit for specific performance says this: parties to a contract must perform as to the specifics in that contract. In other words, seller must sell and buyer must buy. Therefore, as a buyer put off by a seller at the last minute and they won't settle with compensatory damages, I'm going to sue for specific performance in a court of law. And the judge hearing the case most likely would say to the seller, I'll give you one last chance to settle up with the buyer now before I rule on the case. If you want to pay them the compensatory damages or perform the contract, it's up to you. But you got to do one or the other. And if you choose not to, then I'll decide what you're going to do. And the seller says, no, Your Honor, I'm staying in the house. It's the best house I ever had, and I don't want to move. Then the judge is going to say this, okay, according to contract law then, Mr. Seller, I'm ordering you to do what you said you were going to do, and that is to sell your house. The buyer is suing for specific performance, and that is seller must sell. Therefore, you're required and ordered by the court to sell your property at the terms and conditions noted in the contract. And the seller says, no, I'm not going to do that. Wrong answer, because now the judge has a little leniency. He can say this, well, in that case, Mr. Seller, if you refuse to perform by performing on your contract, then I have the right to award the buyer an amount of money equal to 3 times the cost of the transaction. This is called treble damages, Treble. Treble meaning 3 times the amount. So if you're buying a house for $500,000, Mr. Buyer, the seller will not be selling you his house, but will be giving you a cash settlement of $1.5 million as a penalty for not selling. Now that seller has to think, gee, either I sell my house and make 500, or I keep my house and pay 1.5 million. What's he going to do? Probably going to sell. And if he doesn't, then he's ordered by the court to award the buyer treble damages of 1.5 million on the purchase price of 500,000. I've never been involved in a case that went that far. I've gone to the compensatory damages level, but no further. I've heard horror stories, though, of courts that insist on specific performance and parties literally throwing chairs and things in the courtroom to object to the judge's decision. People get nutso when it comes to this stuff. I hope you never have to participate in a closing that goes all the way to a suit for specific performance. What a horrible thing to happen. But that's exactly what can happen when the seller decides to back out at the last minute, and the buyer has a right to get his money back or at least be compensated for the losses he incurred. Well, wait a minute, that's not the end of it. Because remember, if the seller backs out just before the contract is closed, what about the realtor's commission that was earned at the agreement of the sale? Now the brokers are going to sue the seller personally for default of fulfilling their contracts to supplying the commission monies they're due. This guy's going to be in a hole 6 ways to Sunday if he doesn't perform. So guys, I've never seen a case go that far, and I hope you never do too. It's just that some people have this stupid thing in their head that says, I'm right and everybody else is wrong. Well, guess what? Chances are you're the one that's probably wrong and everybody else is probably right, just so you know. So I'm going to end it there for our discussion at the moment. I'm going to resume at 3 o'clock and tell you what happens if the buyer defaults. So right now we're on our break from 2:30 to 3, and I'll rejoin you at 3 and we'll finish up this chapter. So we'll see you then. Hey, it's 3 o'clock and it's time to start again, guys. So let's finish up this day and progress through this chapter quickly. So we're talking about additional contract issues, and we're talking about the breach of the default or breach of contract. And we talked about if a seller defaults. Now let's talk about what happens when a buyer defaults in a contract. Well, if a buyer defaults in a contract, then the seller has a few options. Number one, they could merely declare the contract invalid or forfeited by the buyer, at which time they can keep the deposit monies and move on and list and sell the property. The seller could rescind the contract, pretty much very similar. Or if the seller wishes to, they could sue the buyer for not compensatory damages, but liquidation damages. There's a slight difference. Compensatory damages are designed to offset and compensate the client. Liquidation damages go above that and say, if extenuating circumstances exist that cause these kind of losses that could be inferred, then those losses must also be included in the suit. And if that fails to produce the buyer to buy, then the seller has the right to sue the buyer for specific performance, meaning the buyer must buy or suffer treble damages to the seller. So there you go. This is what happens in default or breach of contract. Most likely it's going to be resolved by rescinding, negating the contract, paying some damages, and getting out of it. Very rarely does it get further than that. But if it does, now you know the steps taken. Okay, so let's move on. Statute of limitation. Oh, wait a minute. I can't see or hear anything. Well, maybe you need to refresh your connection. Can you give an example of the damages? We already did that. There would be monetary damages based on the acquisition cost, and treble damages means 3 times that. Statute of limitations. Next to the statute of frauds, next to the statute of liberty. Okay, I know, that's silly. But in New Jersey, the statute of limitations is something of a legal terminology. Statute of limitations on contract law, which is what we're talking about, in New Jersey is 6 years, meaning parties to a contract have the right to sue the other party based on the contract for up to 6 years from the date the contract was consummated, meaning the date of closing. So in other words, if a buyer feels that they were misrepresented to, or the seller thinks that, or whatever the case may be, they want to sue the other party, from the date of closing, there is a 6-year window in which they can bring suit based on the contract law, based on the contract that was signed. After 6 years, you can't sue on the contract anymore. And that's why a real estate broker is required to keep all records for no less than 6 years. And there comes that 6-year limitation. Statute of contract law. Statute of limitations on contract law states both parties can bring suit against the other on the basis of what the contract says for up to 6 years after the contract was signed. All right, contracts used in real estate business. Well, first of all, preparing a contract is very easy to do. In your 14th edition textbook on page 175 starts the New Jersey Realtors Approved Sales Contract. Real estate agents have the right to use this pre-printed fill-in-the-blank form of contract for the sale of 1, 2, 3, and 4 family houses. 5 families or more, can't use this contract. Commercial properties, can't use the contract. It's for residential properties of a 1 through 4 family housing only, or single condominium units, which are treated as single family houses. And it also covers the sale of 1 individual lots for sale. So you as a licensee will be able to use this contract in the sale of 1 to 4 family homes, condominiums, and individual vacant lots. All you have to do is fill in the blanks. There are certain requirements, however. Number one is that in New Jersey, you must indicate your business relationship to the clients in the contract itself. And on page, excuse me for a second, on page 184, the contract stipulates under Article 29 the declaration of brokers' business relationships with their clients. So there you go. It's got to be right in that contract. It's right there. The second requirement is that if you look on the first page of the contract above the table of contents, it says this. This is a legally binding contract that will become final within 3 business days. During that period of time, you may choose to consult an attorney who can review and cancel the contract. See section on attorney review for details. So what does that mean? That means every contract for the sale of residential properties, 1 to 4 families, single developable lots, or individual condo units, has the right to be reviewed by an attorney at the buyer and seller's discretion. You don't have to. No hiring of attorney is required. But it is strongly recommended that you get a competent real estate attorney and review your contract. Therefore, all New Jersey contracts for the sale of residential properties must include an attorney review section. And the attorney review section means this: from the date you sign the contract, you have 3 business days in which to review this contract with your attorney. If you decide to proceed with the contract, you would finalize that contract after 3 business days, or if you find that you want to make changes in the contract, you must first of all disapprove of the contract and notify the other party so they can respond. If they agree with the changes, then they would sign the agreement, wait 3 more business days, because by signing a change in the contract creates a new contract. Wait another 3 business days, and then you can be out of attorney review and proceed. But I will caution you, during attorney review periods, quite often deals fall apart. Sellers are presented backup offers that are sometimes better than the original offer they accepted. And if so, the proper way to cancel this is to, first of all, disapprove of the original contract with the buyer to cancel it. Then accept the new contract as a attorney review status. So this quite often does happen in a situation where the inventory is very tight, where a better offer comes in and the seller opts for the second offer, cancels the first one, then accepts the second one as a backup, and then performs in the second one. There is a the study of an attorney review period, as I said, for 3 business days. So when does this start? Well, if today is Friday and I sell a house today, attorney review starts on the next business day, which is Monday morning, not tomorrow, Saturday, or Sunday. Those are not business days. So Monday morning starts the attorney review. That means Monday, Tuesday, and the end of business on Wednesday would end attorney review if no changes were to incorporate. And on the end of Wednesday business, both attorneys write a letter. We accept the terms and conditions. Let's move on to the contract phase. And now you have a binding contract on both parties. But quite often, one of the parties does this on the Wednesday afternoon. Dear Mr. Seller or buyer, whoever the opposite party is, we agree to most terms and conditions of the contract. However, we disapprove of the contract because of Article 24. If you were to change the wording in Article 24 to reflect the following, and then you would give the example of what you want reflected, then we would agree to the contract presented at that time. In other words, by saying we disapprove the contract, you're saying contract's dead. It's not accepted. But then it says, however, if you would agree to these changes, so the other party writes back a letter, yeah, we agree to the changes. At that moment, because something changed in the contract, another 3 business days must ensue before you can end attorney review. So now it's Thursday, Friday, Saturday and Sunday are holidays or weekends can't be. So the next Monday afternoon, A week and a half from now, the 18th, we could be out of attorney review. But that's when the other party says we agree to all terms and conditions. Just however, we disapprove the contract and insist on these changes. Now the other party can respond and accept those changes, and then you start a new 3 days. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday at midnight, you're out of contract review if no other changes occur. As a real estate practitioner, you want to stay on top of this to make sure that attorneys aren't extending this contract beyond any necessary time. Because the longer it takes to get out of attorney review, the more potential that contract could have to fall apart by other offers coming in, a buyer changing his mind, whatever the case may be. So attorney review is important to understand, and that it must be included in all New Jersey real estate sales contracts for the sale of property as well as for the rental of residential apartments and properties. That's right. Tenants in New Jersey have the right to an attorney review period in their lease contracts with their landlords. If a real estate agent is involved in a transaction, he must ensure that that is included for both landlord and tenant. All right. Any questions about the attorney review process? Excuse me. If both parties consent, can attorney review be shortened? Yes, it can be. If both parties agree in writing to end it early, they can do that. I'm sorry, I thought there was another question. Maybe there isn't. Is there another question? The book says that notice of disapproval should be submitted by certified mail, delivered personally, or telegram. Oh, what? Telegram. Now we're going to send a Pony Express next. Yeah. Obviously, these rules were written a long time ago. In fact, even today, many of the documents include the requirement for a facsimile be used. Who, believe it or not, uses faxes anymore? We do email correspondence with documents attached as PDFs or whatever. So I know the terminology is a little weird, Peter. I'm surprised you picked that out, but yeah, it's kind of antiquated in some ways, yeah. Was there any other questions before we're ready to move on and finish up the day? It says the notice is effective upon sending. It does say that. However, the proper terminology as attorney review does not occur until all parties have been noticed. Doesn't necessarily mean sending, because I could send a telegram today. It could take 2 days to get there. So how could attorney review actually start upon sending a telegram? Kind of silly, in my opinion. All right, let's move on. There is a federal requirement for our real estate contracts. Remember we talked the other day about hazardous materials and property just yesterday. And one of the federal requirements is that a real estate sales agent in the sale of a residential property or the rental of a residential property must ensure compliance with a filled out lead paint disclosure. That's a federal requirement and requires that all agents enforce the notice by supplying the document to buyer and seller, landlord and tenant. And they must sign, and the realtor must keep a copy of that with the contract for a minimum of 6 years. Now, remember, all records are kept by the broker, not the salesperson. So it is the broker's responsibility to keep these records. Buyers have a right to do a lead paint inspection, just like they have a right to do a radar inspection, a structural inspection, a septic inspection, an underground storage tank inspection. They have the right to do that. If they choose to waive their rights for inspections, which a lot of people do today, that means it doesn't matter if it has or not in buying a property. So different contract forms we use today: listing agreements, sales contracts, buyer's agency agreements, transaction brokerage and disclosed dual agency agreements, sales contracts, offer and acceptance, earnest money deposits. These are all forms of contracts. Know your way around them. Contracts make us money. So the more you know about them, the better off you're going to be. Parts of a sales contract, reiterating once again, all contracts for the sale or rental of real estate must be in writing. We must have competent parties in the transaction. There must be an offer and accepted, also known as the meeting of the minds, which means an agreement to buy, an agreement to sell, signed and attested to by signed contracts. There needs to be an adequate description of property. So if you look on page 175 again, down below, it starts with the parties of the, number one, parties and property description. Who are the buyers? You got to write out that information. Who are the sellers? You got to write out that information. And then it says the property in question, you have to give a legal description. So for contract purposes, the street address, along with the county and municipality and block and lot number, is an adequate description of the real estate for contract purposes. Where do you get that? You can get it from the MLS, or you can get it from the tax record of the client. Just ask us to look at their tax bill, and it has all that information on it. Then, in order to have a sales contract be valid, there must be consideration. So on the bottom of page 175, it shows purchase price. That would be the consideration. But then it shows the breakdown on how that purchase price is developed. There's an initial deposit, an additional deposit, mortgage amounts, and any balance of purchase at the close make up the total sales price. So do me a favor, guys. When filling out these contracts, please check your math on the contributing factors to the purchase price. Do they add up? And if they don't, go back and redo it, because it does not look very professional. Making an offer where the numbers don't add up. Because how can I have my client accept this offer if the numbers aren't real? Make sure the numbers add up. Then the grantor must agree to convey title rights to the property at closing, and states that he has the right to do that. A place and time of closing should be mentioned in the contract. However, and I'm going to be very specific here, if we do name a place and time of closing and it's not met, it does not void the contract in any manner. Quite often, when attorneys or title companies are scheduling closing, they have to consult court catalog libraries and schedules. They have to consult if title companies are working that day. And if there's a special court case that attorney has to go to, then he may want to change the date of the closing. So just because the date of closing isn't met doesn't mean the contract's no good. It just means they're going to reschedule the closing, that's all. And the parties must sign the contract. So at the end of the contract on page 186, they got to sign a contract for buyer and they got to sign a contract for seller. And look on the left-hand side, there's a witness spot. That's where the realtor can witness the signature by signing next to it. You don't have to have notaries or attorneys or judges do this. You can do it as a real estate agent by witnessing their signatures. Before I go on, is there any questions about these parts of the contract or the attorney review? Okay, oh, there is somebody asking, so I'll hang on. Does buyer and seller need to sign at the same time and date? No, it could happen on different days. It's Friday night, I write up an offer with a buyer, the seller's out of town. We can do here's the thing, Michael, let me bring you to the 21st century, because Like me, sometimes we dwell in yesterday's transactional process where we use paper contracts. Today's different, guys. All my contracts are held in a cloud storage I can download to my phone, fill in the blanks by typing in on those blank spaces, attaching it to an email and sending it off to the party. They could literally use e-signature because it's a verifiable e-doc, return it to me in seconds, send it off to the attorneys, and everybody's got everything done in the same, literally 10-minute time frame. In the old days, before technology, I'd have to take a contract sometimes, put it in a UPS envelope or a FedEx envelope, send it out cross country, wait 3 days or 4 days before it gets back to me before we had a contract. What a fiasco. Today we can do it all in minutes. So to say it must be all done the same day, no, it's not required, so long as it is signed and agreed to by both parties. But today, a lot of stuff happens almost instantaneously. It spins your head how fast we can do stuff. Another question? Ashley. Okay, no other questions, so let's move on. All right. Non-essential parts of a valid contract mean there are parts to a contract which are not deemed essential, but probably find their way into a contract. Number one, are there any encumbrances to which the deed will be made subject to? Mr. Seller, we need to specify that in the contract of sale so the buyer has a written record of that contingency in the contract or the encumbrance that which you speak of, like easements, special assessments that have not been paid, any liens that you're not satisfying, or are you going to be taking care of all liens and debts when you sell? Are there any encroachments on the property that could be serving as an encumbrance? Have you granted any licenses to anybody to use the property? All those things have to be spelled out. Now, what about earnest money deposit? In the olden days, I'm talking like 10 years ago, it was quite common to say, okay, Mr. Buyer, with this offer, I need a check for $1,000 to show the seller your good faith in trying to follow through on the contract. So the buyers write a contract including a $1,000 deposit check, which is made out to the realtor's trust account. And we would approach the seller and say, look, I've got this signed contract offer, and I've got a $1,000 deposit by the buyer to show his good faith in pursuing the contract. Will you agree to the contract terms and conditions? And then we negotiate. However, today, the buyers say this: we'll put the earnest money deposit down as soon as the contract's accepted by the seller. In other words, why write a check to the realtor in case it doesn't go through? Then I'm going to have to wait like a week to get my check back. Now, if I write the offer and it's not accepted, there's no money having to worry about having it get returned. But if it is accepted, then I'm required to put my deposit monies down so that the buyer has that good faith on my part that I am going to pursue the contract. But realistically, I got to ask a question, guys, and I'm trying to be serious here. First of all, earnest money deposits are not required as essential parts of a contract. It's purely a custom we were into for years to say, give me a deposit so I can show the seller you're serious. The other part is this: why tie up money when it's not necessary? It's a valid question. So even though there's no legal requirement for a deposit, most people put a deposit down to show that they're serious about doing business, but it's not required. Another part of the contract which is non-essential but usually a part is the mortgage financing. So right after the disclosure of the finances on the bottom of page 175 comes a paragraph saying how much deposits being deposited into what account under whose trust fund, what kind of mortgage is being generated for how much money, etc. So it's got to explain everything about the monies in the following paragraphs. Contract must also say that the buyer has the right of possession when acquiring title ownership rights to the property. Title evidence is a contingency where the buyer has the right to do a title search. Now, next week, we're going to talk about titles and title searches and all that other goes, title insurance, not title, T-I-D-A-L, title, T-I-T-L-E. And then another part of a contract could be prorations and adjustments. So here's where proration or adjustment may come into play. I'm selling an investment property that generates income. Well, when we determine the closing date, we're going to have to do what's called prorating charges and expenses. So let's say we're closing on June 15th of the calendar year. If the seller, the landlord, collects all rents on the 1st, then there has to be some sort of adjustment at closing because the buyer's entitled to 15 days worth of income from the rent. Therefore, you have to prorate the amount of money that the seller gets to keep and how much he must give to a credit to the buyer at closing. So those kind of balances, checks and balances, have to be figured out before the closing occurs. The contract goes on to say that the seller must keep must keep homeowners insurance on the property to the date of closing or be responsible for risk of loss. So if something happens to the property, like a lightning bolt hits it, turns it into cinders, that the seller has adequate home insurance to cover the cost of building a new home that the buyer will get. And it must contain contract wording about default by either party. And if it says in case of default, then it must refer to lawyers will consult you about your rights of default and when someone breaches contract. And then another contingent or another essential element is any contingency. A contingency could be the buyer getting a mortgage, the buyer doing an inspection, the seller offering seller financing could be a contingency. There could be other contractual contingencies that were not standard parts of the contract, and things like the sale upon sale clause. What's that? That's a clause I, first of all, would never accept on behalf of a seller in a contract offer, where it says, as a contingency, buyer will close after buyer sells his property. The question is, what if he doesn't sell his property? Then he can't buy this house, which holds up the seller from moving onward to do whatever he wants. It's literally a domino effect. I would never want to see that in a contract, but I've seen contracts have that in them. Other contract contingencies could be FHA and VA financing. There's certain paperwork that's required under FHA, certain inspections and contingencies that must be fulfilled with the FHA for them to give a loan out. Subject to end of year's report, the home inspection may reveal that there's deficiencies in the structure. And if so, the seller is going to be required to fix those or credit the buyer for the cost of fixing those. That could be a contingency. A contingency could be an escape clause. Hey, I can't get the mortgage, but the contract allows me to get out of the contract if I can't get it in the 10 days after that period elapses. Contract contingencies could also incur liquidator or compensatory damage limits and things like that. And New Jersey requires that all fill-in-the-blank form contracts be in plain English. If you look through this contract, which is a substantial contract, goes on for like 10 or 11 pages, that it's all in plain English. There's no first party, the first part, and the second party, the second part, wherefore, unto, therefore. There's none of that crap. It's all the buyer this, the seller that. Very easy to understand. But it must be in English. Contract could also provide for a rescission of the contract based on certain things that occur. If there's an option agreement, that may be placed in the contract as well. And if offering seller financing, such as through a special form of seller financing like a land contract where the seller becomes the bank for the buyer, what are the things that happen? When does the buyer actually gain ownership of property? How are the payments structured? What happens if they don't pay, et cetera, et cetera? And if entering into a contract with those kind of contingencies, you want to have your attorney draw up all those things in the contract, because me as a realtor, I can't do that. I'm not an attorney. I can't add language to a contract or change things in a contract. I'm not an attorney. So you can see, guys, getting an attorney to assist your client certainly is up to the client to determine, but recommend to them at all appropriate times, which is almost always, that they should be talking to a good real estate attorney. So where do you find one? The broker you're going to go work for knows of such people and will give you a list of which you should recommend at least 3 service providers for any specific thing you're offering. That way the client has the right to choose who they want to use. But if they want to use their own representative, that's up to them. So, before I close out the day, any follow-up questions to what we have talked about? Can the contract be in Spanish, or will you need it in English as stated with a Spanish translator? Contract needs to be in English, so if you have foreign-speaking clients, you probably have them hire a translator to translate the document to their language so they can sign that and the English language contract. That way, there's always an English contract and the foreign language equivalent if there's ever a question. So for apartments, there are most of the time a deposit that is mandatory. How is earnest deposit not? I'm sorry, Stephen. Let me just back up for a second here. I'm going to moderate. So you're talking about apartments. There's most often the time a deposit. That you mean the security deposit. Well, on Monday, we're going to talk about leasehold estates and those contracts. So I'm not going to put you off. I'm just going to say, hold on your question until Monday, and your question will be answered. I promise. Can the buyer or seller add language to a purchase or rental contract without using an attorney? If they're an attorney, sure they can. But if they're not an attorney, how do you know what they're writing is actually legal? I can't do it. I'm not an attorney. I'm not allowed to do that. So how can a client add their own, unless they're acting as their own attorney? And if so, they would have to make that statement. But again, if you have questions about legal process, may I direct you to a competent real estate attorney who could answer your questions? Since I'm not an attorney, I really can't answer your question, Robert. I'm just saying that's the source you should go to find out. All right, hold on, I did moderate, so let me open it up. Was there any other questions? All right, looks like we answered the questions. Oh, there may be another one. Kieran, you have a question? What special clause for the FHA versus or VLI? Okay, Kieran, good question. Let me hold on. Let's moderate and answer that question. In an FHA loan, they don't send an, quote, an appraiser from the bank to estimate value. What they do is they hire their own staff appraisers who are property inspectors as well. When they go to do the appraisal, they may make a list of criteria that seller must take care of before they approve the mortgage for the buyer. In that case, it puts an extra burden of doing things on the seller that they normally wouldn't want to do on a conventional loan. Therefore, that would be a contingency in the contract for the seller to have to perform certain things just so the buyer can get a mortgage. VA, same. There may be an issue about inspection criteria from the estimator that needs to be rectified before the veteran can buy that house. But again, this is why a lot of times when you see in the MLS, no FHA loan buyers, only conventional buyers or cash buyers, because they don't want to deal with all that inspection criteria from the FHA or the VA. So I hope I answered your guys' questions, and if not, well, I'm surprised, but are there any other questions before we start on our chapter review questions? And I'm not seeing any, so I'm going to moderate the conversation and pull up the chapter 11 review questions. And remember, these are the chapter review questions that are in your book, and all the answers to these questions are in the back of your book. Number 1. A legally enforceable agreement in which two parties agree to do something for each other is known as a legally enforceable agreement in which two parties agree to do something for each other is known as a 92% are correct answering C, valid contract. Good. Number 2, a person drives into a filling station and tops off her gas tank. She's obligated to pay for the fuel through what kind of contract? I just posted the homework link for you to do chapters 10 and 11 for Monday morning review. Also posted the link if in case you could give us a review. I saw a couple of you did, and I appreciate that. I really would like to hear from as many people as possible to see how we're doing. And I just entered my email address as well in case you want to reach out to me. So question number 2, a person drives into a filling station, tops off her gas tank. She's obligated to pay for the fuel through what kind of contract? And that would be B, an implied contract. 84% of you did answer that correctly. Number 3, a contract is said to be bilateral if maybe time for rotator cuff surgery. Ooh. Tough getting old, man. Don't get old, guys. Don't ever get old. Don't ever get old. It's tough. Getting old is for the very hardy people. I'm not that hardy. So a contract is said to be bilateral if, I guess half of us went to sleep, but those who did respond, 92% of you got it correct. D for dog, all parties to the contract are bound to act. Yes. Number 4, a seller gave an open listing to several brokers, specifically promising that if one of the brokers found a buyer for the seller's real estate, the seller then would be obligated to pay a commission to the broker. This offer by the seller is a this offer by the seller is an And about 75% of you who did respond are correct, answering D, a unilateral agreement. That is correct. Number 5, during the period of time after a real estate sales contract is signed, but before title actually passes, the status of the contract is and about 57% of you are correct, answering B, executory. Remember, still things have to be performed, meaning it's executory. Number 6. The 17-year-old New Jersey resident signs a contract to buy a home for himself and his wife. The contract is and unfortunately, only 37% of us got it correct. It is B, valid. What? He's 17, but he's married, meaning he's been emancipated and is now considered an adult and is a valid participant in a contract. The contract's valid, B for boy. Number 7, the broker has found a buyer for a man's house. The buyer has indicated in writing his willingness to buy the property for $1,000 less than the asking price and has deposited $5,000 earnest money with the broker. The buyer's out of town for the weekend and the broker has been unable to inform him of the signed document. At this point, the document is and about 50% of you are correct, answering B, it's still an offer. Remember, it's not an offer and acceptance until both parties sign and receive copies of the contract. B for boy, it's still an offer. Number 8, consideration given in exchange for a sales contract may take the form of 96% of you, 97% of you got it correct. D, any of the above. Well done. Yes, any of the above is acceptable. Number 9, a buyer makes a written offer to buy an apartment building for $900,000 with the closing to be on December 30th. The seller, who has income tax concerns, signed his consent to sell for that amount, agreeing to all the terms except that the sale cannot be closed until January. At this point, who's free to walk away and forget the whole thing? And 35% of you are correct, answering A, either the seller or buyer. Here's an offer that was never accepted. Therefore, either party is free to walk away from it. It's just an offer. Number 10, the seller told the buyer she'd leave the washing machine, but instead took it with her. The written contract made no mention of the washing machine. The buyer has no right to complain because the rule of And about 59% of you are correct, answering D, parole evidence rule. The written contract takes precedence over the spoken word. Number 11, New Jersey real estate brokers and their salespersons may fill in sales contract forms for All right, 86% answered correctly A, 1 to 4 family properties. But what about other residential properties or commercial properties? What contracts do you use? You don't. You use what are called letters of intent, which you draw up a sheet of paper with the buyers and sellers' names, the property in question, the terms and conditions of the sale. Then you have them sign that and ship it off to their attorneys, and they develop the contract. So unless it's a 1 to 4 family property, single condo or developable lot, then you must use letters of intent. For all these properties, you can use the sales contract. For number 12, a broker must deposit funds received as earnest money deposits in a special bank account within, I didn't go over it today, but we did go over it day one. And 76% of you are correct, answering B for boy, 5 business days. That is correct. Good for you. 13, buyers have a 7-day period in which they may cancel sales contracts on, and I didn't say it, but it's in your textbook. If you read it, you'd know. Buyers have a 7-day period in which they may cancel sales contracts on. And the answer, my friends, is A, certain condominiums under the Planned Unit Development Full Sales Disclosure Act. Certain condominiums have an additional 7-day period in which the buyer can rescind the contract without penalty. A. 14. If a real estate sales contract does not state the time is of the essence, and the stipulated date of transfer comes and goes without a closing, the contract is then 50% of you agree and are correct in answering C, still valid. Yes, remember I told you if the date and time comes and goes at closing, don't worry, it's still okay. So C, still valid, is correct. Number 15. A buyer has a contract to buy a commercial building, but would rather let his friend buy it instead. If the contract allows, the friend can take over the buyer's obligation by the process known as and 83% of you agree and are correct answering A, assignment. Real good, real good. Number 16. A suit for specific performance of a real estate contract asks for, what I say specific performance was. And let's see what we got. 54% of you agree and are correct answering D, a forced sale of the purchase. Buyer must buy, seller must sell. That's specific performance. 17, in filling out a sales contract, someone crossed out several words and inserted others. To eliminate future controversy as to whether the changes were made before or after the contract was signed, the usual procedure is to, again, I didn't go over it. It's in your textbook. If you read it, you'd know. And from those who responded, 75% of you obviously read the chapter and answered correctly. D, have both parties initial or sign in the margin near each change. That would be adequate. Yes, good. 18, excuse me, the buyer's offer in writing to purchase a house for $120,000, drapes included, with the offer to expire Saturday at noon. The seller's reply in writing on Thursday, accepting $120,000 but excluding the drapes. On Friday, while the buyers are considering this counteroffer, the seller decided to accept the original offer, drapes included, and state that in writing. At this point, the buyers And from those who have responded, about 68% of you are correct answering B, are not bound to buy and can forget the whole thing. Yeah. There was no resolution to it. They never accepted the first offer and then changed the acceptance to originally accept the first offer, but the guy didn't respond to the first counter offer. It's still just an offer. It's no, everybody can forget the whole thing. Number 19, in New Jersey, a valid contract for the sale of real estate must include Now, here's a way to figure out the answer if you don't know the answer. In New Jersey, a valid contract for sale of real estate must include, well, we already discussed the fact that earnest money deposit's not required, so A can't be correct. Since A is incorrect, therefore D can also be eliminated. Can't be all of the above. Therefore, it's either B or C. What if there was no witness to a signature? Contract still valid. Therefore, B for boy is the only answer. And about 65% of you were correct in answering B, an adequate description of the property. Correct. Number 20, the sales contract says the buyer will purchase only if his wife flies up and approves the sale by the following Saturday. The approval of the buyer's wife is a all right, really nice to see. And from those who did respond, about 90% of you got it correct. A contingency. Yes, it's a contingency. All right, again, real good today, guys. 2 good chapters, 2 good responses from you for chapter review quizzes, and I'm impressed that you guys did so well. Very good. And it is Friday, so you're done for the day. Woohoo! Weekend's here. Now, I'm going to be working tomorrow and Sunday, but I'll be back with you Monday morning at 9 a.m., at which time we're going to go over chapters 12 and 13. And for the night and weekend, you have chapters 10 and 11 to do for homework. So again, I listed the homework link, our link for the review, if you could. I'd really appreciate a review from you guys. And there's my email too. So if you're done, you're done. Go home, have a great weekend, and I'll see you Monday morning. If not, stick around. If you got a question, I'll answer.